Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Harvard Islamic Studies Circle HISC Seerah session 137, where we're continuing with the life of the Prophet ﷺ and the aspects in Medina post Battle of the Ditch and prior to the Treaty of Hudaibiyah, which is one of the most monumental events that happened in the Prophet ﷺ's life, and we'll talk about that obviously in a few weeks' time, inshallah. But we're doing some of the other incidents and expeditions between Khandaq and Hudaybiyah that the people of the Seerah have chronicled. And some of these are just inconsequential, and others have sort of minor fiqh issues. But taken together, they sort of give us an impression of how things have changed and the mentality of the Muslims, how they feel they need to be as a community, as a society, as a state, and going on from the Prophet ﷺ declaring after Khandaq that now we will take the fight to them. No more being passive and defensive. We as Muslims will go on the offensive and let them know what we're about and project Muslim authority and power in a more rigid and systematic way. And we talked before about Abdullah bin Unais, who was sent to kill Khalid bin Sufyan al-Hudhali, who was setting up an army. We talked about sort of the assassination attempt on the Prophet by Abu Sufyan, where he put a bounty on the Prophet's head, and then a Bedouin came and said, "Look, I'm willing to kill the Prophet for the bounty," but then that assassin was caught red-handed as he's entering the mosque, and the Prophet said, "Look, tell me the truth, and I'll let you go." And he told him the truth. The Prophet let him go, and that Bedouin actually became a Muslim after having tried to, or on his way, the intention was to kill the Prophet. And then we talked at length about the assassination of Salam bin Abi al-Huqaiq, also known as Abu Rafi. Now, he financed the war of the Battle of the Trench. He paid for the Confederates. He was the multi-billionaire of the time. And the Khazraj wanted to sort of get it even because the Aus had previously taken out Ka'b bin al-Ashraf. We talked about that many months ago. So the Khazraj, again on the back of a lot of negative propaganda because of one of their tribesmen, Abdullah ibn Ubay, who was the leader of the hypocrites, they wanted to carry favor with the Prophet. So the Prophet approved of their mission and appointed Abdullah ibn Atiq as the emir of the small group, about 4 or 5 of them. Because Abdullah ibn Atiq, he could speak the language of the people of Khaybar, which was sort of thought to be a mix of Arabic and Hebrew, or Hebraic, some would say. But he had the right accent, so he could fit in. So he went with a group of his men, and we said the story about how he waited outside just before sort of Maghrib time, before the gates of the fort were going to be closed, and they called him in because he was pretending to relieve himself. He gets in and then gets his companions in. They find where Salam bin Abi al-Huqaiq is, and he calls out to him in the darkness and kills him, breaks his leg on the way out, comes back, and the Prophet makes a dua and puts his hand on his leg, and it heals. So that's what we did last time. So just carrying on, inshallah, with a couple of other instances. One is the next one that the chroniclers have mentioned is that of about a small group of 30 Sahabi as a Sariyah. So we talked about the difference, quite a while ago between Ghazwa and Sariyah. So Ghazwa is a battle where the Prophet ﷺ is in charge and he's fighting at the Battle of the Ditch. And a Sariyah is an expedition or a platoon that the Prophet ﷺ dispatches to do some work, either intercept a caravan, go for a little expedition or war, or get some intel. So this is a small Sariyah led by Muhammad bin Maslamah, and some say this was in Muharram of the 6th year of the Hijrah, and he went to Bani Bakr. Now, the Muslims, they attacked Bani Bakr, and the whole tribe dispersed. It's a large tribe, and lots of spoils, booty, fell into the hands of the Muslims. And as they're coming home, they come across a party a small caravan, who look rather suspicious because probably they're all sort of dressed up in finery. You can tell that these aren't your normal travellers. So on a hunch, Muhammad bin Maslamah, he captures the group because something's not quite right, and you have that sort of sixth sense, especially if you're on a heightened situational awareness where you're sort of the leader of a platoon in enemy territory. So they capture this small group, not knowing its significance, and they came back to Medina. Now, in this small group is someone called Thumamah bin Uthal al-Hanafi, who is one of the chiefs of Bani Hanifa. And a couple of explanations for his expedition. One is that he was ordered by Musaylimah, and later on Musaylimah gets the name Musaylimah al-Kadhab, the liar, because he was one of the first people when the Prophet ﷺ died to announce that he was now a prophet, because you could see how it did, from his Jahili mentality, he could see how it did work for the Prophet ﷺ. So he said, well, I'm going to claim to be a prophet. And again, we've had this encounter before with Musaylimah, where he meets the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ is there asking for his support in establishing Islam, going back a few years, and Musaylimah was very arrogant towards the Prophet ﷺ. So we know his personality. So some say that Musaylimah had dispatched Thumamah to kill the Prophet ﷺ, but on the way, because they're coming from sort of inner part of Arabia, on the way he was going to perform the Umrah first. So this small convoy gets captured, and along with all the other booty, and they come into Medina, and the Prophet sees Muhammad bin Maslamah and says, "Do you know who your prisoner is?" And they said, "No, we don't know. We just picked him up. Something wasn't quite right." And whether the Prophet had met Thumamah before, or if he'd been informed by Jibreel, but actually prior to that, some time ago, the Prophet had actually made dua that to Allah to deliver Thumamah to him, so he could be a Muslim. And obviously this is the culmination of that dua. So the Prophet says to Muhammad bin Maslamah, "Do you know who this prisoner is?" And he said, "No, who is it?" The Prophet replied, "You've captured Thumamah ibn Uthal al-Hanafi, and this is one of the largest tribes in Arabia, sort of on a par with the Quraish in terms of how prestigious and influential they are. So it's a big it's a big tribe. And Thumamah, obviously, at the time, he was allied to the Quraish. He supported the Quraish. He himself, obviously, was a polytheist, a mushrik, right? And previously, he had publicly threatened to kill the Prophet ﷺ if he ever got the opportunity or the chance. And again, so you can see why Musaylimah may have dispatched him to do the job, prove his credentials, essentially. So now you've got Thumamah as essentially a prisoner of war. So the Prophet ﷺ commanded the Sahabi to treat him well and tie him up to one of the pillars at the back of the masjid. So obviously the mosque of the Prophet ﷺ. So there he is as a prisoner of war. There are no jails in Medina at the time, and such a high value target. What else are you going to do? At least with the mosque, there are people there 24/7. You still got the Ila Sufa who were living there, and there's lots of activities. And essentially, the masjid is the hub of the community. It's the center of activities where the Prophet leads the prayer. It's where a lot of issues are discussed. It's essentially the hub of the society, and Thumamah will get a chance to be exposed to Islam and the Muslims, hear the recitation of the Qur'an, see the dignity of the Muslims, overhear sort of some of the study circles, the conversations, the Qur'an recitation. So he's going to be essentially immersed in that environment. So he's tied up, and probably there's somebody there, guarding him at the back of the mosque. And that evening, one of the Prophet ﷺ told one of his wives to send his own food to Thumamah. So, I mean, it's a symbolic gesture, essentially. I mean, it's not that the Prophet ﷺ had a different food than the Sahabi or the other Muslims. It's not that he is having a particular banquet or anything. It's just a symbolic gesture to a prisoner who is still a chief of his own tribe, that here is the food of the Prophet ﷺ, and he wants to share this from you. So they went, the messenger went, took the food and said, "This is from Muhammad, the messenger of Allah." So obviously he's untied and he eats the food. So the next day, the Prophet ﷺ, comes to him and asks him, to basically, what have you got to save yourself? What are you going to do? And Thumamah sort of said, "Look, if you're going to kill someone, right, then you would have to choose one of noble descent, meaning if you kill me, things are going to get quite tricky for you. There'll be some sort of civil war. This is, I'm really high ranking, so you don't want to kill me. However, if you're going to be gracious, then let it be to a grateful man, and if you were to ask for money, then you will have to ask it from a generous man." So basically saying, look, treat me well and I'll treat you well. Treat me harshly, things are going to be bad for you and the Muslims, right? So he didn't respond positively to becoming a Muslim, and he wasn't interested, and basically said, you kill me, fine, but there's going to be war. You let me go, I'll give you anything you want, essentially. I'll be good to you. So he's, Thumamah, he's not begging for his life. He's retaining some of his nobility, his dignity, his, prestige, and Prophet said, "Look, accept Islam, and things will be okay for you." But Thumamah didn't hear anything of it, so he just sort of dismissed it. The next day, same thing happened again. The Prophet says, "Well, what do you have to say for yourself?" And Thumamah replied, look, if you're going to kill someone, then you'll have killed someone from a noble background. But if you're going to be gracious and be gracious to a grateful man who can sort you out, essentially. And then the Prophet ﷺ walked away and just left him there. Then the third day, the same thing happened. The Prophet ﷺ came to Thumamah and said, "What do you have to say for yourself?" And Thumamah gave exactly the same response. So over 3 full days have passed. Thumamah's not budging. So the Prophet needs to think, well, what do I do now? He's been exposed to us. He's seen what we're about. Tried to treat him with some respect and dignity, given the circumstances, given the fact that he was an avowed enemy of the Muslims and the Prophet ﷺ. So then the Prophet ﷺ gives orders to the Sahabi to untie him and let him go. You can't force anyone to believe. There is no compulsion in religion. And if the Thumamah's heart cannot be turned like this, then fair enough, let him go. What's he going to do? He hasn't been physically treated bad or roughed up. He's been there in the mosque. He's been fed well, looked after, albeit tied up. Doesn't want to become a Muslim? Fine, off you go. So they untie him, and Thumamah gets up, dabs himself down, no doubt, and then walks out of the masjid. And then he walks out, finds somewhere, takes a bath, does a ghusl, and then sort of 10-15 minutes later, he walks straight back into the masjid, and he declares his shahada, becomes a Muslim. And obviously he's, and we see this a lot, with the converts who are in a dire situation. They don't want to convert in the situation where they're prisoners or they're under duress, because then that might put a question mark over their sincerity. Because people could then, claim that they only did it to be free, they only did it for the money, as we'll see sort of later on. They're only doing this, to get the rewards or to get money. So there'll be these questions, and and they may not be able to dissect that sincerity in themselves later on. So only when he's let free, he goes out, comes back of his own volition, becomes a Muslim. So therefore no one can accuse him of having the wrong intentions. And obviously the Prophet is very happy, and then very famous phrase of Thumamah, oft repeated, and Thumamah turns to the Prophet and says, "Ya Muhammad," and again he refers to him as Ya Muhammad, because obviously all the Sahabi have been ordered to call the Prophet Prophet or Rasulullah, not to refer to him by name. Thumamah is just literally less than 10-15 minutes a Muslim. He hasn't learned all this etiquette, so we can let him off. So he goes, "Ya Muhammad, I swear by Allah, there was no face in the whole world that was more despised and hated to me than your face. And but now, wallahi, it is the most beautiful and a more beloved face to me. And I swear by Allah, there was no religion I hated more than Islam, but now it is the most beloved to me. And I swear by Allah that there was no city I hated more than Medina, but now it is the most beloved to me." And that's what these 3 days sitting in the mosque, observing the Muslims, did to him. When you see Islam in action, it's not just theory, it's not just people talking how things should be, it's not conjecture, theoretical, it's not in the textbooks. This is living Islam. When people see how Islam actually is, and the character of Muslims who were changed because of Islam, and obviously being exposed to the Prophet ﷺ and the Qur'an, right? It was enough to melt the hardest of hearts, and showed his sincerity. And then, he explained to the Prophet and to the Sahabi what was happening, on his way when he was coming and he was captured, and why he was captured in that state. But one of the things he mentioned was that he was going to do Umrah, and that's why he didn't go with a big entourage and have his close protection team with him. But he was asking, should the Prophet, well, my intention was to do the Umrah in Mecca, or should I go back and continue it? And the Prophet said, yes, go back and fulfill that. So then, that was fine. And then later on in the evening, they brought some food for Thumamah again, and basically he just ate a little bit of the food, and the Sahabi were quite astonished that he's barely touched his food. And then they mentioned this to the Prophet that, look, for the last 3 days he's been sort of eating everything we've given him, all the different types of food. Now we've given him food and he's hardly touching it. Why is that? And the Prophet turned around to the Sahabi again, it's really famous, says, look, why are you amazed? In the morning this person ate with the stomach of a disbeliever. Now he is at night time he is eating the stomach of a Muslim. Verily, in truth, a disbeliever eats with 7 stomachs, and the Muslim eats with 1. Obviously, you can interpret that how you like, but basically, being a Muslim, your relationship with food is very different. You're more grateful for what you have, and the barakah in the food is very different than if you are a non-Muslim. So then, the next day or whenever, Thumamah goes towards Mecca, completes his Umrah, and it said that Thumamah was, he publicly declared that he's a Muslim by reciting the Talbiyah, and it's said by some of the historians that he's the first one who publicly recited the Talbiyah of the Hajj Umrah as it had been originally intended, and it hadn't been heard like this for generations, because he's going in there and he's saying labbaik Allahumma labbaik, labbaik la sharika lak labbaik, innal hamda wa ni'mata laka wal mulk la sharika lak. So again, in translation, here I am at your service, O Lord. Here I am at your service, O you have no partners. Thine alone is all praise and bounty, and yours alone is the sovereignty. You have no partners. And then the Quraish used to add, when say you have no partners except da 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 da. And you can't say you've got no partners and they say except. So here, Thumamah is bringing back, reviving the original Talbiyah. And so then the Quraysh, they freak out. What's this, heretic saying? So they surround him and saying, have you become a heretic? Have you become a Sabi? They used to call, as we've said before many times, they didn't refer to the Muslims as Muslims. They referred them in a derogatory term. Have you become a Sabi, like a Sabi'een, right? Which is like one of these other, religions. But essentially saying, have you become a heretic? Have you become a renegade? Have you, we would call people now, have you become a terrorist or an extremist, or are you a fundamentalist? So they're turning around saying, are you now an extremist? Are you now a fundamentalist? Are you now a Sabi? Without saying, are you now a Muslim? He goes, no. I'm not a Sabi. I am a Muslim. So again, this is this tense situation. This is really bad for the people of Mecca. They're still, reeling from defeat upon defeat, and the inability to defeat the Muslims and the Prophet ﷺ, and all the assassination attempts have failed. And now you've got a chief of another tribe coming in and publicly declaring he's Muslim, rubbing salt into the wounds of the Quraishis. And as people start to scuffle, things get nasty. People, drawing their swords, and obviously they're about to attack him or get very physical with him. And then what some of the other senior Qurayshis recognized how politically sensitive this would be, so they turned to the mob that's surrounding Thumamah and says, "Look, calm down. If you kill him, you will have to face the wrath of the whole of Bani Hanifa." Right? So they understood what that meant. I mean, if they do anything to him, Bani Hanifa is a huge tribe. Things will be really bad. So then they leave him alone, but because he's been sort of insulted and pushed around and threatened, Thumamah, gets really angry and says, "Wallahi, not a single seed of grain will come to you from my tribe until the Prophet ﷺ commands me to do so." So they controlled a lot of the grain, and a lot of the grain would come through their tribe, and they, it would go from Bani Hanifa to Mecca. So Mecca was actually very dependent for their grain on Bani Hanifa. And he went back to Bani Hanifa and he fulfilled his promise. I mean, he didn't convert the whole of Bani Hanifa, because we know later on about Muthaylim al-Kadhab, but because of how he was treated, he managed to convince the other leaders of Bani Hanifa that they can't push him around one of their own tribes people like that, so their own sort of tribal loyalties, and they cut off all supplies of grain to the Quraish. And then obviously the Quraish, their supplies dwindled, and they started essentially having their own mini famine. Shortages were so acute, it's said, that they resorted to sort of they were forced to eat sort of this really weird mixture of camel's blood, camel's hair, and other rotting stuff. So that's how desperate things got. Ilhiz, I think it's called. Then Abu Sufyan, he had to swallow his pride, essentially, after insulting Thumamah and insulting the Prophet ﷺ. He had to write a letter to the Prophet ﷺ to try and get the grain re-established. But again, in his own pride and arrogance, he goes, "Oh Muhammad, you claim to be, you claim to preach to be good to your relatives, yet you're letting your relatives here in Mecca wither away." So then the Prophet ﷺ, not wanting to sort of overtly harm the innocent people in Mecca, agreed to that and sent a letter to Thumamah to allow the food and the grain to be sent to Mecca, and that's what happened. The wheat supplied to Mecca continued after that, and so that's the story of Thumamah. Essentially, a dua that the Prophet ﷺ made some time ago. Allah's gifting Thumamah to the Prophet ﷺ. Much like when the Prophet ﷺ made the dua, one of the two honors, become Muslim. It turned out to be Umrah bin al-Khattab, not his uncle. And here he wanted sort of one of these chiefs, and out of nowhere Allah presented him to the Prophet ﷺ. And also you've got a non-Muslim essentially living in the mosque. Okay, he's a prisoner in the mosque, but it shows the permissibility of non-Muslims to visit the mosque, to be in the mosque, and later on when the Christians in Najran came, the Prophet even allowed them to perform some of their worships within the mosque. Not obviously to put the idols up, but it shows that the mosque, is a community hub, and as a place of dawah, you obviously have to let non-Muslims come and experience and to see the peace and equanimity that's surrounded inside the Muslims of the masjid. Also, the need to take a ghusl when you become a bath. Again, it's not compulsory. So non-Muslims, when they convert to Islam, then they are encouraged to take a bath, and it's symbolic. Obviously, it's just a gesture of purification. As when we do wudu before we pray, it's a symbolic gesture of purification. So the non-Muslims are encouraged to take this bath, and again, one of the other things around the sort of the understanding of sincerity is here you have Thumamah, who was sincere. He's there, he's observing the Muslims, and it's melted his heart, and he becomes a sincere Muslim, and he dies later on. Actually, he's to show his sincerity to the cause. He fights against his own tribe's people in the battles of Ridda, of apostasy, when the Prophet died, when Muthaylim al-Kadhab claimed to be a prophet himself. Civil war broke out, and Thumamah, he fought alongside the Muslims against his own tribe, despite the tribal allegiances. So again, it shows his sincerity. And then you've got people like Abu Sufyan who are exposing their hypocrisy. He's the one who forced out the Muslims. He's the one who forced out the Prophet ﷺ. Yet he's now trying to criticize. He's the one who launched the wars against his own brethren, right? Yet he's now criticizing the Prophet ﷺ for this oath that Thumamah had taken. And again, it just shows how low and twisted the enemies of the Muslims and the enemies of Islam will go to defend their own actions. They claim to be on the high ground, yet the moral high ground. Yet, if you actually look and analyze their actions when it comes to their dealings with the Muslims, they rule up, they rip up everything in the rule book, and it becomes fair game. Anything becomes fair game, and you see that even in today's society, where the enemies of the Muslims, they talk about peace, they talk about representative leadership, they talk about good governance, they talk about fair trials, all that sort of stuff. But when it comes to the Muslims, they throw away all of that, and anything goes. So that's the story of Thumamah. Briefly talk about another quick ghazwa, which is one where the Prophet ﷺ is in charge, and this ghazwa is of Bani Lihyan, and Bani Lihyan. They were one of those really treacherous tribes that had asked for some people, the Prophet ﷺ, to send some people to teach them, and then they basically they turned them, they massacred them and hanged them, and they were one of those tribes that tricked the Sahabi, as I say, and then massacred them, and they betrayed the trust of the Prophet ﷺ. And we went into great detail about them when we talked about the massacres of Murasai, so these were one of the tribes, and they're the ones that killed Khubayb, and Khubayb was the one who was sort of a prisoner who then prayed 2 rak'ah he started the sunnah 2 rak'ah, whilst being on death row just before he died. So the Prophet now has got a chance post Battle of the Ditch to settle scores and really, as we've said before, project a different attitude of the Muslims. So then he sets out with 200 Muslim fighters to take, to seize on this opportunity after the collapse of the Battle of the Trench, the failure of the Allied forces, the Ahzab, to settle scores here. So he sets out, something Rabi Awal or Jamaat al-Ullah in the 6th year with 200 fighters, and then he pretends to head north towards Syria, and then, because he doesn't want to let people know, but then he changes route as they're going and goes to Batn Gharan, which is where the companions were massacred, and then he makes dua for them, invokes Allah's mercy on the people that were shaheed there, and then heads towards Bani Lihyan. Bani Lihyan, they have their own spies and scouts, and they get a whiff of the fact that the Prophet ﷺ, he's been there and he's heading towards there. So then they basically they flee. They go to the hills, and they're not to be seen. So the Prophet ﷺ, he enters the city. It's all empty. He stays there. Probably at least for 3 days as the victor, and just establishes his authority there. But there was no actual fighting between them and Bani Lihyan. Then it's some people say that this particular battle, although there were some skirmishes, although there was no actual proper combat, this was when Salat al-Khawf was revealed, although we talked about Salat al-Khawf being revealed according to other interpretations, quite some time ago, a couple of the other battles. But the other thing, it said that the Prophet he taught the Sahabi the dua of safar, of travel, on the back of this expedition to Bani Lihyan. A couple of other minor things. I'm just wondering whether to go through them here, or just save them for the next session. I suppose I'll save them for the next session, actually, inshallah, and we'll talk about some of the minor incidents, other expeditions, probably next time. So there's a few battles that the Prophet he sends out Zayd bin Haritha to as head of the platoon or expeditions. There's another one by Muhammad bin Maslamah, where they get ambushed, and then he has to send Abu Ubaidah bin al-Jarrah to sort of take revenge in that, as I say. And then there's the story of Abu al-As, who's the son-in-law of the Prophet who's married to Zainab binti Muhammad. So a lovely little story about Abu al-As as well next time, inshallah. So I'll finish there. And again, as I mentioned right at the beginning, just a lot of minor expeditions and skirmishes between now and sort of the Treaty of Hudaibiyah, but it's setting the scene of why Hudaibiyah is so critical, where we can see the posturing of the Muslims has become different. They're growing in confidence, they're growing in stature, and they're able to do and act differently. So inshallah we'll talk about that in more detail next time. So until then, do remember the Ummah and us in your du'as. And if you've got any questions, queries, comments, do get in touch. WhatsApp, email, YouTube, Facebook, whatever, other social media. And as I say, do remember us in your du'as. So take care. Assalamu alaikum. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. جزاك الله خير everybody. Assalamu alaikum.